Okay, for those of you who are on time, thank you. And for those of you a little bit late, I'm sure you'll be able to catch up. Hi, Siraj, Supo. Great, so according to my clock, it's 4 o'clock. So let's get going. So what we're going to talk about today is a few sort of secrets and foundations and some advice and guidance on what happens behind the boardroom doors. And then at the end, so we'll be talking just general foundational stuff for about 40-45 minutes. And then I'll go through an introduction into the Sirdar Applied Directorship online program, and the next one we've got starting in September. And my name's Tim Holmes. I'm a senior partner at Sirdar Group. So who is Sirdar Group and why have we got pictures of mountains? So let's start there. So Sirdar is a global leader in education, appointment and guidance of high performance boards. And we've specialized over the years in privately held and family businesses, mainly because the typical private and family business doesn't really have an understanding of how governance operates. And we also find when we're placing directors on boards, they need to have very different experience from those who've been serving typically on a corporate board. And the reason why we have pictures of mountains is based on the meaning of the word Sirdar. So the context we use it in is the Sirdar is the lead Sherpa on a mountain expedition. And the idea is, as in this picture, the Sirdar helps and supports that team climb the mountain. So in the mountain analogy, it's all about making sure that we have everything prepared at base camp, that we don't launch ourselves up if we've chosen Everest or if we've chosen Kilimanjaro. For those of you in Kenya, a great mountain. I've climbed it myself. It's an awesome experience. Highly recommend it. So if you're climbing Kili, you need to make sure you've got the right equipment, you've got the right walking boots, you've got your sticks, you've got the pack or someone else to carry it. In other words, you're prepared. You've done some training. You've got the right skills. You're fit enough. You've got an understanding of what's ahead of you, how many days it's going to be, what equipment you need, etc. So the job of the Sirdar on a more complex environment, is typically to make sure that all of that stuff happens at the beginning, to make sure the team is a team before you start, as far as possible, before you start the journey, that you have a plan, that you have a goal. And then along the way, they go with you along the way. So it's very different from a consultant kind of engagement. Here's the report, here's the map, cheers. The Sirdar goes along with you on the journey and then course corrects as circumstances change. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And building a business is no different. So as Sirdar Group, we try to follow that analogy by making sure that companies have the foundations before they try and launch themselves into a next growth phase. They have the foundations of understanding who is in their team. Do they have the right skills? Have they got the proper structures and processes in place? And particularly, have they got the right team members at group level, at the director level? So we've been around for nearly 12 years now, and our experience has been across, I think we're up to 20 odd countries around the world. Our experience has been with family businesses, but also doing training for listeds, for NGOs, for other not-for-profits, for charities, etc. And we've learned along the way that you really need to have some kind of practical understanding of how this thing called being a directorship works to really truly be effective. And that's what we'll talk about at the end in terms of what the Applied Directorship program is designed for. So what we're looking for is, we're looking for better ways of training directors so they build up their skills and knowledge, better ways of helping directors to gain experience, and also making sure that when we appoint a director that they are effective as soon as possible. And what drives me personally is this concept of differentiation between a good director helping and supporting to grow a company and a great director that fundamentally changes lives. And what I mean by that is that a great director and changing lives is very much more linked to understanding all the stakeholders that a particular organization can impact. Making sure you understand what their needs are, what their challenges are, and how best to support them in their particular way. So yes, you've got your staff, yes, you've got your clients, yes, you've got your suppliers, but what about your landlord, for example? How do you work together to have the building operating and functioning in the best way possible? How do you work with your local community and environment, whether it's to make sure that they've got jobs and that you're employing as many people in that region as possible, or you're working together with your community to make sure you can give back in the best way possible, which is really important in times like these. And then broadening it to understanding your industry, and are you involved in industry body? Are you helping to drive the industry to grow and improve and change lives? And then you go to your communities and your broader communities and your county or your region and state, and then out to your country and then into the rest of Africa. That's what I mean by changing lives, because you have massive leverage. If you can start to employ someone, you have an impact on 6 or 7 people's livelihoods by giving them food on the table, etc., etc. So a little bit about me. I'm originally from the UK. That's where the funny accent comes from. I've been in South Africa since 1992, originally trained as an engineer, and then moved into the software space. And along that journey, I joined a company in 2002 where we were setting up a utility, an industry utility. So the shareholders were the big industry players at the time. And they'd all put money in to get this thing going, the software platform going. And they all wanted to sit on the board because they didn't really trust each other organization, and was this other organization going to have more influence on the outcome? So they needed to be there and they needed to be involved. But the starting point was literally myself and one other employee. So we had 2 employees and 12 directors, 10 of which were shareholder representatives. So along that journey of 11 years with that company, it was starting to understand, well, what is this thing called a board? I've got some highly skilled people with decades of experience in business, but I'm not really feeling like I'm getting the value from them. I'm seeing that they're mostly shareholder representatives. They're not operating as directors in their own right. And what am I supposed to do and present to them so that they can give me best value back? And along that journey, did all the Institute of Director courses and met Carl Bates, who's the founder of Sirdar and now my business partner. And the stuff that he was teaching just made so much sense. It was so practical. It was something I could apply that would make a difference in my everyday life and make a difference on my board. And at the end of my 11-year journey with that company, for me, it was a logical step to make the move and join Sirdar, which I did in 2013. And I've been working on boards, serving as chairman, doing facilitation of training programs such as this one, and working in various roles, MD, head of sales, and now person without portfolio or senior partner, where I focus on chairmanship and I focus on business development. So let's do a little poll to find out a little bit more about you, because it would be interesting for me to see who we've got in the room. And what I'm looking for is an indication of whether you are shareholder, manager, executive director, non-executive director, or independent director, or multiple. So please tick multiple boxes if they will apply. I'll just give it 30 seconds. So I see we've got quite a few of you. Great, we're nearly up to halfway. Come on, come on. Feels like a horse race, this. Okay, keep it going, keep it going. Cool, nearly there. A few more, come on. Let's have the full complement. Let's start this with full participation. Okay, there's 10 of you to go. Nearly there. Okay, I'm going to count down. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Okay, thanks very much. Awesome to see that we've got a good spread, shareholder, directors, executive directors, and managers. And that's what we often find, particularly in family businesses, that individuals hold multiple roles. They are wearing multiple hats. And we'll talk quite a lot about that in this first session. And good to see there's at least 3 of you that are independent directors. That's fantastic. So they will talk about, obviously, the independent directorship part as part of the training discussion. Someone question, how many participants? So we've got over 60 people here today, which is great to see. Cool, so I'll just move this out of the way. Come on, you. Sorry, logistics here. Great, so what I'd like you to do, and thank you for Salah Hadi, if I've said that correctly, for putting your question in the box. Please put your questions in the box or put them in chat box, write them down on a piece of paper. But what I want to do is for you to be clear on why you've attended today so that we know that we've satisfied that requirement and answered any questions or queries you had. And particularly, what is your biggest question regarding high performance boards? Because that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about what happens behind the boardroom door, but very specifically about what makes a high performance board or a high performance director. So please jot that down. I'll be doing questions at the end, but just make a note of it now before you forget it. So let's start with the end in mind, as Steve Covey said. So if we don't understand what a high performance board looks like, feels like, acts like, then how on earth do we know how to get there? So what we're going to try and cover today is to give you some sense, some picture of what that end in mind looks like, what a high performance board looks like. So at least you can start to move in that direction, and also to understand a little bit more about what a high performance director does in that context. So again, you can make a decision, okay, that's what I want to do, and this is the journey I need to go on. And we can obviously help you with that. But it starts with understanding your end in mind. Are you trying to build a high performance board? Are you trying to be a high performance director? And if you are, happy to help you, happy to take you on that journey. So high performance board, what does this comprise of? So in our minds, there are three major components, which when you bring them together, make sure there's a much higher probability of having a high performance board. The first one is obviously the directors. If you don't have directors in the room, then you don't really have a board. The second piece is the team, and that's the team of directors in the boardroom. Are they working together? Do they complement each other? Do they challenge each other? Are they different personality profiles? All of the different aspects as if you were building any other team, but most importantly, as a team of directors, are you elevating the discussion to the point where you're talking about strategy? Or have you got too many executive directors in that room, which means the conversation tends to drop down to a much more operational level? And I'll go through this in a little bit more detail later. The other piece, the last piece, is methodology. So what we've developed over the last nearly 12 years is the methodology piece, from experience, from trial and error, from seeing what works, what doesn't work, on an ongoing basis with companies. And if you bring all three of those together, if you make sure you have properly trained, highly skilled, highly experienced, strategic thinking directors in the room, operating as a team, but with a broader team also channeling the information into the board, as well as knowing what to do with the information that comes out of the board. And along the way, you are following a clearly defined, proven methodology, then there's a far higher probability than you're going to get the outcome that you're truly looking for. And when we're investing in other businesses, there's a reason why we invest in other businesses. And we expect there to be more than 2 directors, because it's really difficult to run a business completely on your own. Yet we expect that to be the case when we're in what we would term our own business, when we are a business founder. Yet the bigger the business, the more that it needs more heads, it needs more ideas, it needs more experience to take it to the next level. And a listed company, we'd expect it to have more than 1 or 2 directors, because we intrinsically understand that something as complex as a listed company needs more heads to think of all the different aspects of a strategy, make the best decisions possible, and take the business forward. And we hold directors accountable if they don't do that. We'll certainly try. So it's really important that we understand that the same principle applies in the businesses that we're operating in, regardless of size, because it helps and supports a business to grow and increase its value. I've been working with an investment company for a few years and helping their clients. And the conversation I had a few weeks ago, he mentioned, look, I'm getting all these leads of companies who need investment, but they're just not investable. And what he meant was that they don't have the basic governance structures in place, so that I, as an investor coming into that organization, have the confidence that the right things are being done, that there is a methodology in place, that they have got a team of people running the business, that we have got an understanding of what it means to be a director and everything in between. So what do we define? What is the definition in our minds of a high performance director? So it's one that's obsessed with creating meaningful economic impact through their role on the board and the role their company plays in the economy. Furthermore, such a director is not afraid to have the tough conversations, as well as do the mundane aspects that together enable board success. There's a lot in that pretty small, concise paragraph. So first thing is you need to be obsessed with creating meaningful economic impact or social impact, but you've got to be obsessed about creating some kind of impact through your engagement with an organization. And through the role of the board and the company plays in the economy. So we talked about that broader stakeholder engagement. So understanding who those stakeholders are and understanding how the company can have a broader role on the economy. And probably one of the most difficult pieces of this is to not be afraid to have the tough conversations, as well as do the mundane aspects that together enable board success. So it's really important as a director, particularly as an independent director, to be able to have the confidence, to have the experience to stand up and have that tough conversation, to deal with the elephant in the room. It's a critical part of your role. It's a critical part of the reason why you're there, is to have those tough conversations. So think about all of those aspects when you're serving as a director, when you're looking to bring directors in your organization. And if you can, as an individual, cover all those bases, or if you bring some into your organization, you can test them against all of those different aspects, then you're going to serve well as a director, and also you're going to get someone, hopefully, that serves you well as a company. So the other part, now you've got the director now, how do you create a high performance board? So it's one that through its rhythm, so we talked about the methodology piece and decision making. So absolutely you have to make decisions, or should be making decisions. A lot of boards seem to make hardly any decisions, which boggles my mind, but I've seen it on more than one occasion. And hold the company accountable to a performance standard higher than it has ever had before. That's really tough if you are one of the individuals who ticked all those boxes, where you are a shareholder, you're a director, and you're a manager. How are you going to be able to hold the company accountable to a performance standard than it's ever had before, when intrinsically you're going to be defensive, because the reason why it's performing the way it is fundamentally because of you and your founding team. So it needs an independent perspective often to say, look, we can do better by doing this. It takes the emotion out of the conversation. It changes the game. And by doing all of these things, then you have a much better probability of increasing the value, increasing the return for shareholders. And also, we've talked about this impact on other stakeholders. And if we do all of these things together with thought, with proper planning, foresight, then we're more likely to do it in a sustainable basis. We're not working for these typical 3-month figures, 6 months maybe. We've got a long-term plan. We've got a 10-year plan. We've got a 100-year plan. We want this organization to leave a legacy, to continue multi-generational. And if that's what we really want, we need to be operating as a team, and we need to be holding the company accountable to a performance standard higher than it's ever had before, and reducing the reliance on individuals. This is a picture that a colleague of mine came up with, and I think it really represents why directors on their own, it doesn't matter how many you have or how good they are, cannot or will really struggle to impact company performance if there isn't that strong boardroom in the middle, if there isn't that pivot point in the middle, because you need something to lever against. And if you've got a well-composed board, you've got it properly structured, you've got renewal, you've got turnover of directors, you're bringing in fresh ideas, bringing in fresh energy, you've got a really solid foundation to lever on. And if you've got good, sound, strong directors in that role, then you can fundamentally shift company performance, and you can do it quite quickly. Please bear in mind that leadership and governance is a continual work in progress. So it's absolutely critical that as leaders, we continue to learn, and particularly about governance, because governance is changing all the time. There are new ways of doing it. We're moving more and more, particularly in South Africa, away from rules-based to principles-based. So understand those principles. Make sure you understand which pieces of King 4 apply to you, because as an organization, doesn't matter how big or small it is, it applies. It's good common sense stuff that you need to look at. And as a leader, we need to be constantly reading, renewing, unlearning, moving forward, because both leadership and governance have changed dramatically over the last 10, 20 years and will continue to change at probably an escalating rate. So it's so fundamentally important to continue to do training, to continue to engage the mind and learn new things. So foundations, craft or enterprise. So where we start from in our sort of building of or conversation with an organization is really to try and understand where they're at. And the distinction that we talk about a lot at the beginning is understanding whether the organization is set up as a craft or an enterprise. And the difference is a craft is typically built from a founder or a small group of founders who are the most skilled people in the particular service, product, whatever it might be. And the organization is built on that skill. An enterprise is much more about a team, and it's not as reliant on individuals. So it's really important to understand where you are and where you want to be. So craft businesses tend to be quite small, less than 10 to 15 employees. They tend to be driven by 1 or 2 or 3 individuals who are highly skilled in their field. So you see it in doctors' surgeries and lawyers' practices and accounting practices, where it's 1 or 2 or maybe 3 highly skilled people, and then some supporters, some trainees, some master craftsmen, and then craftsmen and their apprentices coming up through the ranks, but basically doing a similar kind of thing. And that kind of organization can be highly profitable, but it's not an asset of value in and of itself. So if you are in a craft situation, understand that's the situation you're in. Make sure you maximize the amount you earn per hour, maximize the amount of hours you are productive by having your support team to help you, and then make sure you put those earnings into assets that are outside the organization. Because once you are not there, there is very little left. Once you take the dentist out of their practice, there's a couple of nurses and a receptionist, but that's it. There's no business left, or very little business left. So as a craft, different. Enterprise has a value. It is an asset of value. And we'll talk a little bit more about that now. Because it's built on a team, so it's not reliant on an individual. It can continue multi-generationally because it's built around a system. So the entrepreneur and enterprise are 2 forms of the same root. And the root is the word entreprendre, from the French to undertake, or undertake a promise. So the entrepreneur comes up with the idea, comes up with the promise to the market, whether it's a product or service. What am I promising to do? What am I promising to undertake and deliver to the market? then the entrepreneur needs to create some kind of enterprise to deliver that, to deliver on that promise. And the entrepreneur may move on to the next idea, the next business, and continue. But ideally, you want such a strong handover, such a strong culture, such a strong understanding of the system, of the promise, etc., in that enterprise that it continues without the original founding entrepreneur, because they have built it into that enterprise. The enterprise knows how to uphold that promise, knows how to deliver on that promise. So what is the role of a director and the board? So a director's key role is strategy. That's the fundamental difference between a director and a manager, is it's all about strategy. The board drives the strategy, and then management helps and supports to implement it. The board is responsible for the strategy. I'm not saying it comes up with a strategy, but it's responsible for ultimately formulating what that final strategy looks like and what is the action plan to deliver on it. And then holding the leadership accountable, or the management accountable through KPIs, through report backs, whatever it might be, to make sure that that strategy is being delivered on. And as we talked about in the analogy of the Sirdar, you need to make sure that if that strategy is wrong based on new information, that you quickly pivot and adjust. So it's a leadership role as well. The directors need to be seen as leaders within the organization. This is not a tick box exercise. This is a forward-looking strategic leadership role, which means we need to be skilled. We need to understand strategy effectively. We need to have experience. We need to have some kind of gravitas in our field. And then the third component of the role of a director is obviously to make sure that governance is applied and implemented. And what is governance? Governance is very much about the policies, the procedures, the system that drives the rules, the laws, the way we do things around here. Because if that system is well developed, everybody understands it, and you put the strategy into that system, then you can drive it through the organization, and the organization can make headway and grow and expand and become profitable because all of the pieces are taking it in that direction. So where does governance come from? So it originally comes from Kubernetes, which is Greek, and Kubinari, which is Latin. And it comes from this concept of steering or piloting a ship, directing, ruling, guiding. So if you think about the early days when you had ships going out to sea, there was no telephones, no satellite phones, not even decent navigational systems. You had investors decided to build a ship. They put their money into the ship in terms of putting the money into the wood and building it and making it seaworthy, defining what type of ship it was, whether it was a merchantman or whether it was going to be carrying passengers, whatever it might be. Then you employ the officers and the captain, and then the officers and captain then go and find the crew. As soon as that ship leaves the harbor, the shareholders cannot influence the outcome. And in business, it should be the same. The shareholders structuring the business, building the business, defining what the business is for, and then your right is to return on investment, but your right is not to be one of the captains, to be one of the crew. Your right is to stay on the dock and hope and pray that that you've trained everybody well enough, or you've given them a clear enough goal in terms of what you want to achieve, what your intent is with your shareholding, and that they come back and they bring back the rewards. But there's some risk in that. The captain and the officers then have to make sure they understand the capabilities of that ship. Can it go in shallow water, deep water? Does it cope well in strong winds, or does it only work in light winds? On this course, how do we make sure that we use the capabilities effectively to chart the proper course? If the conditions change, what are we going to do? Have to make a new plan. And directorship's no different. So if you have ever been sailing, or if you have some experience of what it's been to be on a boat, then it's quite a good analogy to have in your head to understand those different roles. And then of course the crew do the rowing, pull the ropes, make things happen, make the ship move. Okay, let's move on to 3 hats. So what we're talking about now is the fundamental roles of the shareholder, director, and manager. So this is, if I was drawing this on a path, I'd ask all the audience, which do you think this is, shareholder, director, or manager? But I'm going to have to give the game away because I can't see anyone's putting their hands up or writing messages quickly enough. Shareholders have multiple levels of influence in the organization because of voting rights. So you may have one shareholder, but in most cases there's more than one shareholder, and you may have different levels of shareholding. So you have 51%, 20%, 10%, so there's different sizes of shareholding. And some shareholders might be involved in the organization and some may not. So there's a whole broad cross-section of different influences, different expectations from that group of shareholders. So it's really important that as an organization, you understand what is their statement of intent, what do shareholders want to get from this organization. A board is very different because it is a team of equals. So it's a circle. And management is always some kind of hierarchy. There's a tree of communication that needs to go up to someone who takes responsibility. So we have the shareholders, the board, the board members sitting around their table, and we have the management, and we have the MD CEO, who is the peak of that triangle, that flat structure or that steep structure, however it's arranged, but there's always some kind of triangle. There's a hard line between shareholders and the rest of the organization for a reason, because as I touched on earlier, shareholders have a very specific set of rights. They have the right to appoint and to remove directors. They have the right to return on their investment. And that's about it. You don't own anything in the business. The business cannot be owned by anybody. It's a juristic person, as I touched on before. It has rights. So you can own rights, a right to return, a right to choose who the directors are, the leadership are, but you don't have a right to meddle in the operations and influence decision-making at a strategic level as a shareholder. As soon as you do, you start to breach that barrier. You start to lose your protection as a shareholder in a PTY. So it's really important that if you've gone to the trouble of putting in place trusts and other ways of protecting your assets as a shareholder, that it's not easily seen that the decision maker in the trust is also a decision maker in the organization. There's some way of breaking up that decision making process so that you can protect your assets. Between board and management, much more of a perforated line or dotted line, because there's always a continuous flow of information backwards and forwards between the board and management. Management's giving updates, board's giving guidance on strategy. So there's always something going on. There's a daily, weekly, monthly engagement happening. Whereas the conversation between a board and shareholders should ideally only happen once, maybe twice a year. And it's much more formal report back. We're reporting back on our strategy for the coming year and our financials for the previous year. This is what we think we're going to do. Any questions? And this is how we fulfilled the mandate you've given us. This is the return you expected, and this is how we've delivered against that return. So the company has a relationship with all 3 of these groups. And the relationship with the shareholder is very much of a selfish relationship because it's all about getting something back. You've put something in, I want to get something back. So it's about me. I'm not necessarily putting the company first when I'm thinking with my shareholder hat on. I might be thinking about that next holiday or I need some money for. I might be thinking about, well, I put this money in 10 years ago and I haven't got anything back. I need some kind of return now. The director's relationship with the company is fundamentally different. In fact, it's completely opposite. The director's relationship with the company should be selfless. And the way that the law approaches the view and perspective of what directors have done is based on that. So if they've put themselves first ahead of the company, then they're likely to get themselves in trouble in law, because the job of the director is to do everything in the best interests of the company. The confusing part, or makes if you've got all three hats, even more difficult, is at a management level, you have both. You have a selfish relationship and a selfless relationship, because you have a contract. So as a contract, you have defined responsibilities, defined role, and you have to deliver against that role, which is a selfless. It's giving to the company based on a set of requirements. And if I have to put the extra hours in to get the job done, then I may not expect any additional reward for doing it. But I've promised that I'm going to deliver it. However, if you don't pay me at all, or if the company doesn't fulfill its promises, then there's going to be a point where the selfish side of me is going to kick in, and I'm going to start saying, look, this isn't working. I'm out of here. So there's both sides of that engagement in a management team and an employee context. So if you're wearing all three hats, it's absolutely critical. Then when making a decision, you know which hat you're wearing. So you understand the context, and you understand what decisions you can and can't make with the individual hats on, and then you document things in the right way so that it's clear that you were discussing this as a strategic level with the other directors. All of the other directors were informed. We made a decision. We wrote it down, whether it's an email or in the board papers, somewhere it was documented that this is what we've decided to do. So as I said, you can't own a business, just as you can't own a human being, because it's seen as a juristic person. It has the same rights as a person. Director's duties. So very quickly, just to give you some insight. So there's two main areas where director's duties come to play. The first is this duty of care, skill, and diligence, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And then the fiduciary duties, which is to act in good faith in the best interest of the company, avoiding conflicts of interest, and not to use your position for personal gain and exercise powers for the purpose which they were granted. So acting in good faith and the best interest of the company are the similar kind of concepts, that you are doing everything with the right reasons in mind, with the right intent. And the intent must be that it's got the best interest of the company at heart. And if it's something that's in my best interest, have I declared that conflict of interest? Have I stepped out of that conversation if it's in a board meeting and let the rest of the team come to the decision without me? Because otherwise I'm potentially conflicted. And if there's anyone questions that decision in the future, then there's likelihood it'll be reversed, or there'll be some kind of penalty or whatever it might be, some kind of contest. And that also comes into this, do not use the position for personal gain. So if I'm starting to think of the business as my business, am I using the assets for my personal benefit? Am I using the company's bank account as my private petty cash box that I just take money in and out as I please because it's there? If you want to make sure that you're running a business effectively, if you want to make sure that there's less likelihood of any kind of issue going down the line, if you want to make sure this business is investable, all of that stuff needs to be much more clear-cut, much more better defined, much better separation between what is yours, what are you getting paid for, and what belongs to the company. And exercising powers for the purpose which they were granted. Big problem in a lot of these state-owned enterprises at the moment, where it's for personal gain, it's for prestige, it's for political wrangling, it's something other than putting the company first. So start with what you've got, start on the organizations you're working with, apply these, and the company will benefit, you will benefit, and ultimately our whole economy will benefit. And the care, skill, and diligence piece is make sure you're taking care. So if the reasonable person test says, well, did you make a decision carefully, or did you just say, no, so-and-so read this document, therefore I trust him and they wouldn't have missed anything, I'm just going to sign it? Or did you actually read it? Did you actually consider it? Did you actually ask for help on something you weren't sure about before you made the decision? Have you got the knowledge, the skill? Have you done the training? Are you up to speed with what the Companies Act says you should be aware of? Are you up to speed with how King 4 should be applicable to your organization? Are you up to speed with the general processes of running board meetings and documenting decisions? Are you making sure that you've got delegations of authority and all of those kind of things in the business so that everybody understands where the reporting lines are? So and also as a director, you need a lot more commercial acumen than being a specialist. So a valuable director needs to have a broad understanding of all of the aspects of a business in order to get involved in a strategic conversation. It's, yes, have a speciality, but you need to understand, if you're the finance person, you need to understand how marketing works and how production works and how the sales team operate and the challenges they're having. You don't need to be an expert, but you need to have at least some understanding of how all these pieces hold together. And obviously continuous self-development, reading, doing courses, making sure you're continuously up to date in both the leadership space and the governance space. So diligence, preparation, attention to detail, talks to the issue of care as well. If I've got board papers, have I read them? Have I digested them? Have I interrogated them? Have I looked for the trends in the financials? Do I understand the financials? Coming back to the skill aspect. It's all, you can't rely on the financial manager to be the person who understands the financials. Everybody on the board needs to understand the financials. So do the course, do the training for financials for managers or whatever it might be that makes sense for you. Because these are the things that are going to be measured on if things go wrong. These are the things that are going to be measured on if someone wants to appoint you to their board. How can you talk to this? How can you demonstrate that you've got experience in these spaces? And it's extensively recognized that governance increases your bottom line and financial results achieved for shareholders and other stakeholders. So we've put together a board survey, and one of the aspects we wanted to talk about in a second, I'll give an introduction. But what I wanted to find out from you now was, have you got an understanding of what are the three critical components? Did you get that from the earlier session? What is a high performance board? Any questions on that? Anything else you're not sure about in terms of what is the concept of high performance board? And do you know how to reduce your risk and increase your effectiveness as a director? So it's about making sure that you are demonstrating that care, skill, and diligence, that you are following those fiduciary duties. That's how you reduce the risk and ultimately increase your effectiveness. So we'll just make sure you write down all those questions. I'll come to them in a sec, just before we go into the Applied Directorship Program piece. We got a few questions here, just a couple. Put them in there, please. And whilst you're thinking about your questions, I'm just going to launch this poll. So for the first section, 3 questions. Have you learned something that is relevant to your business? I've identified some kind of action I can take to improve my business, and I've gained some kind of insight that I previously lacked. So just a quick round. Good to see a few extra people have joined since we did the last poll, so welcome. We're up to whoever it was who asked the question before. We're up to 72 now. Okay, give it a few more seconds. Just hit the button. Thank you. Great, good to see. Great, good to see there's a broad cross-section of have learned something, identified an action, and gained insight. That's fantastic. Give it 5 more seconds. Great, thank you very much. So at least 71% of you that filled in the thing have learned something relevant to your business. That's good news. Great, thank you for that. So before we move into the applied directorship piece, I just wanted to quickly mention that we have done a survey on directors' fees and the power of diversity, the influence of independent directors. We'll be sending out a copy or a link to this survey as part of the follow-up email, so look out for it. This is our second survey. The first one was 2018 data. This is 2019 data. And we've also just started collecting information for the 2020 survey. So please participate. If you are a director, please participate in the 2020 survey. And as I said, we'll send you the link to the 2019 one. And the key insights that came out of it, that boards that do not have independent directors do not perform as well as those who do, which is great. That's what we've been trying to tell the market for a long time. Diversity in the boardroom is still lagging and female members continue to be underrepresented. And there's thousands of pages, hundreds of pages of reports and research that indicate that having one or more, preferably more women on your board does make a significant difference to the performance of your business. If you haven't got female representation on your board, you really need to think about it, because you're not doing what's in the best interest of your business, ultimately. And also just general diversity. So if you look at the people you're selling to, have you got a good representation of the people you're selling to? Because otherwise, how can you possibly understand the strategy of growing your business to the fullest extent? And boards that are not conducting formal evaluations of performance often enough. So we found that very few companies do an annual evaluation, and there's quite a large proportion that have never done some kind of performance evaluation of the board. So if we're doing it for our teams, for our staff, why on earth aren't we doing evaluations regularly for our board? And those that do, because what measures improves, have significant increase in the performance of the company compared with those who've never done one. Okay, any questions on the first part before we move into the applied directorship program? I see there's 3 on the list here. One we've answered. Why should a person not wear the 3 hats? So it's more a case of making sure, if you do, that you understand that you're wearing the 3 hats. I think if you have an opportunity to stop wearing one or more of those hats, then I think it's worth taking it, because it basically makes it much easier and clearer on what your role is. So if you are only wearing a shelled hat, for example, then your role is in terms of oversight of the board. Are the board performing? Are they driving the company in the direction that you would like them to drive it into? Are they following the original founding principles? And if they're not, then remove those directors and replace them with someone who will take the business in that direction. And also understanding, have we actually communicated to the business what we want as shareholders? Because often shareholders have never had a shareholders meeting because they wear all the hats. They may have a board meeting. Most of the time they have an exco meeting, and they possibly never had a shareholders meeting where they're only wearing the shareholders hat. So one of the ways of making that a little bit easier is if you have an independent chairman on the board, it allows you as shareholders who are also directors to step out of that director seat and ask the questions of the chairman representing the board, but only wearing your shareholders hat. So you can start to really interrogate and say and understand, okay, I'm investing all this money in this business. Is it actually giving me the return I need? Or do I need to actually think about putting that money somewhere else? Manager and director, not necessarily such a big conflict, but it can be sometimes quite difficult if you're very close to the operations, particularly as an MD. It's quite difficult often to take that operational hat off when you're in the boardroom. So as an MD, you have no choice. You have to wear a manager hat and a director hat, and it's balancing that is difficult. If you are another executive representative, then there's an opportunity to try and leave the operational responsibilities at the door if you possibly can, so that you're focused in the room on talking to the strategy, talking to how we're going to do this business, run this business better, without thinking about, oh, geez, that's going to be a lot of work. I'm not sure we want to do that. Think through with only the director hat on. So as an independent director coming into a company, it's so much easier to see things and bring things up in the meeting because there's no emotional baggage. I haven't been pushing and scraping and trying to move this organization forward for 10, 20, 30 years. I'm not as invested in the history of it, but I can see that there are some fundamental problems that need to be addressed. So it's much easier for me as an independent director to have that conversation than someone who's been involved in the business for a long time. So I wouldn't say don't wear all three hats, but just understand why you're wearing each one and separate them out as best you can. So a hell of a long answer to a very good question. Thank you. Thank you, Doris. Lessons were required on how to self-evaluate. Yeah, so definitely self-evaluate. On the Applied Directorship program we'll talk about now, one of the sort of building blocks of this is doing lots of self-evaluation, self-reflection. And doing a board evaluation is very much a self-reflection. It's answering a questionnaire that is you answering the questions based on your opinion of how you've performed. Then it's obviously it's up to the chairman to go through that with you and say, well, I think you were a little bit overzealous with that one, and I don't think you've done quite that well. But the point is you've got to do the self-evaluation regularly. And it's not like an exam. As a director, you should be critical of yourself and critical of the board itself. You need to learn to be critical of yourself and hold yourself accountable to do a better job. And that comes from this self-evaluation process. What point do you get outside directors? As soon as you can, really. Directors, independent directors, don't have to necessarily cost you a fortune. There are plenty of people who've done our training courses, for example, who are keen to get onto boards at little or no fees. It's various different reasons why people want to be an independent director. It could be for an opportunity to grow, it could be an opportunity to get an experience in another industry, it could be an opportunity for them to really be able to think like a director because they've only ever been in a situation where they've worn multiple hats. There's all kinds of reasons why people might want to be an independent director, and the fee will be up to them. If they have sufficient funds to not need to earn anything, they may want to do it for free, like people doing directors for charities. If it's part of their career path and they want a portfolio career, for example, the situation I'm in now is very much more of a portfolio career of different boards, then I would expect to be paid for that work, for that time, for that service. May feel they're performing well. Most importantly, how to engage, recognize, top new business. What sticks for measuring performance, please? So it depends on the business. So what is the strategy? Start with the strategy and then define what you're measuring against, or have you delivered against that strategy? So that's across the organization. It's the KPI, it's the key performance indicator. What is the indicator? So for a board, if the strategy is to take the business public, then how far have we got with that? This is the list of building blocks we need to have in place to take to the point where it's going to be listed. The outcome is listed. We think it's going to be a 3-year journey. These are all the things we need to do along the way. How far have we got? It could be that we want to increase the share value, or we want to pay our first dividend. There could be all kinds of things that are the outcome for this period, and then it's measuring the board about how far did we get? Did we exceed it? Did we still stumble and not make it? Why, etc. Just like any other performance appraisal, but it really starts with being really clear on what performance means. Key components board evaluation. So it's what it says in your board charter, and then go through all of those aspects. And the charter would include things like attendance of meetings, or you can miss one, or we fine you if you're late. It could be the chairman's responsible for X, Y, Z, have a meeting with the MD regularly, having a pre-board meeting, getting minutes out on time. the MD's list could be making sure the papers are delivered to the other directors one weekend. All of those kind of things are questions and measures in that board evaluation. Have we delivered a strategy? Have we got an induction program for new directors? All kinds of things. So Sirdar uses a standard template, but each organization has its different nuances and different wording. So it's important to understand the context and then build that into your questionnaire. Risks of being an independent director, basically the same as any other director. The difference is you don't have a clear sight of the operations. So you need to rely on the management. You interrogate and check that the management's giving you the right information. That can be a defense, but it can also be a risk. If it can be proven you just did not know, the information was never communicated, and however hard you tried, you couldn't find it, then there's far less likelihood you'll be held liable. But as an independent director, it's really important to make sure that the information you're receiving is complete as far as possible, that it is accurate as far as possible. Check in, go and do a tour of the factory once a year, or however often you feel you need to get a sense of what's on the piece of paper you're seeing in the boardroom is what's actually happening in reality. So it's care, skill, and diligence all over again. So if the risks are, if you haven't taken care and you haven't demonstrated skill and you haven't been diligent, that's when you're going to get caught out. But immensely rewarding if you get it right, massively rewarding. Okay, I'm conscious of time, so let's get into the Applied Directorship program online. Well, all of our programs are now online. We used to be face-to-face, but they've moved with COVID to be entirely online. Thank you for your questions. So, why are we doing this? So, the idea is, if you run a business and you're looking to implement evaluating board, then this training can be helpful. If you're taking over a family business and you want to make sure that you're skilled to move into that role, then this training can definitely be beneficial. Or you're looking for your first appointment as a non-executive director. If you've only been an executive director before, there's an awful lot more you need to learn, particularly if you want to be effective as a non-executive director, and especially if you want to be an independent non-executive director. So it's important to upskill yourself and make sure you have a much broader context of all of the components of governance. Or you have an opportunity to become a director and you want to make sure that the day you arrive, sit in that seat, you're going to add value. So the way we've constructed this program is that it develops your skills across multiple areas. So you have practical opportunity to demonstrate skills and repeat and demonstrate and repeat. You have the opportunity to be exposed to written materials, to video materials, whether it's for materials we developed or whether it's from TED Talks, wherever it might be, universities across the world. Then apply it, then do self-reflection exercises. So as far as possible, you've engaged all the different ways of learning. You've seen it, you've heard it, you've done it, you've reviewed it. You've looked at the data. What did I do in the first board meeting? How did I self-evaluate then? We're now in the fourth board meeting. What is the difference? Have I improved? Have I moved forward? And we've had plenty of report back from non-execs and execs saying that they'd wished they'd done this years before, even some who've had years of experience as being a director, because their governance has moved on, or they hadn't done proper training earlier on. They weren't exposed to and aware of all of the different aspects of the training, etc., and all of the things they need to know. So it's really critical these days that you make sure you do some kind of training in governance. So what do companies say when we're appointing? So what I didn't mention earlier is we, as Sirdar, do a lot of training. So the Applied Directorship program is one piece, and we do short workshops, we do bespoke education programs for clients, etc. That's the educate piece. Then we have the appointment piece where we help and find and support directors to either find roles or for companies to find directors. And that's run by the appoint division. And then we have ongoing support, our guide support, which is the Sirdar part in its truest sense, in that we work with a company over a long period of time, helping and supporting them to implement a high performance board. So we help them with their methodology implementation, we help them with the skills development, and we help them make sure they get into that rhythm and they run the process so their board meetings become more and more effective and the decision-making process becomes more and more effective. So what companies are saying to us is give us directors who've practiced their skill and experience in a boardroom. And that can be quite difficult to get started. So that's why a fundamental piece of the Applied Directorship program is practicing your skill in a simulated boardroom. So we have 8 simulated board meetings. Just because someone has been a chief executive doesn't mean they will know how to relate to me as a director. So it's quite a big shift often. If someone has been a very successful chief executive, then they move into a board position. You have to be much more open to engagement with, and everybody is an equal in that room. So you've gone from a very firm hierarchy to a room of equals. It's a transition that can sometimes be quite difficult. So just because someone is a good chief executive does not mean that they will necessarily be a good director. Just as a good director is not necessarily going to be a good chief executive. So it's worth bearing in mind. So we want to get someone to demonstrate they've been a good director. And they want to know that we as Sirdar can confirm that this individual knows what they're doing. So for us, the Applied Directorship program is fantastic because we've seen someone operate in a board meeting 8 times. So we've got some practical experience of how they perform. And it's not about certification and knowledge, it's about an understanding and value add. So one of the things we took a hard choice on was this going to be some kind of diploma, or whether is this going to be a certificate of knowledge and understanding, because it has to be practical. It's not about doing an exam, it's not about academic excellence, it's about practical implementation and self-reflection excellence. We want you to go out into the world and do exactly what you did on the course. Repeat what you did on the course. Have the board meeting in a particular way, do a self-reflection at the end, how can we do better? Move on, do it again. Follow a methodology of how you put together the board papers, how you meet before a board meeting to understand what the objectives are, etc., etc. And that changes and gets adapted over time, which is very difficult to stick in a rigorous academic kind of space. Program overview. So how is it different from something like an MBA? Well, MBA is very much focused on being a very good manager. The Applied Directorship program is very much about being a very good director. So they are similar, but they have a different focus. It's that balance of, is it a 1-week intense program? So we've got 11 modules of 4 hours, but there's a lot of work you need to do in between in your own time. And we've also realized that if we made the program as similar as possible to a company that was having monthly board meetings, then there will be a much better chance of developing habits, having a chance to learn something properly and deeply, so it becomes part of the way you do things, rather than very intense in a clinical environment. We want you to make sure that you know how and understand how to fit this stuff into the rest of your life, so that when you go out and become a non-exec director or an independent director, there is an understanding of how much work is involved, an understanding how important it is to stick to that meeting that's in the diary and make sure it happens and doesn't move, because it's the same kind of principles that have been embedded during the program. And it's theory, it's not theory versus simulation, it's theory and simulation. So we want to teach you the theory, which is via the online portal, and then the simulation is having board meetings. Yes, they're on Zoom now rather than in a room, but the concept's the same. You are having a Zoom board meeting in a group, and you stay in that board group throughout the program. So you compete against the other boards that are in your cohort. So for example, you might have a maximum cohort of 20 people on a particular course through a particular range of dates. And those will be broken down into 3 or 4 boards, depending on how many people are on the cohort. So if there's 20, you'd have 4 boards of 5. And then from module 3, those boards form into companies, and you start the process of developing your strategy, competing against each other in a manufacturing, with a manufacturing product in a world that's in a simulated software package. So you get financials that change based on your decisions. They're not case studies. You pull a lever, something happens. It affects the results you get in a month's time. So as I said, try and make sure it's simulated to reality as much as we possibly can. And then also access to videos and readings, etc., to communicate the theory. So it's 11-month program. The first two are the introduction phases. So the first module we do go into this the 3 hats concept in a lot more detail and do some worked examples. The second module is when we start to talk about how you build a board. So what are the things you need to be aware of when you're putting together a board, pre-planning the board process, the concept of a board calendar, what it's for, how you use it. We introduce the profiling tool we use called Contribution Compass, and then we put together the boards starting in module 3 based on your personality profile. So we make sure there's a spread of profiles in each team, the spread of skills in each team, so we don't end up with one team that's all accountants, another team that's all lawyers, for example, and ideally some diversity, age, experience, etc., so that we try and make sure that the board's as close to the way we would build a board in the outside world. And again, so you start to understand and experience why that's so important, to have the diversity, to have the different personality profiles, to have the different skill sets. So then from month 3 onwards, you go around our governance compass, which I'll show you a picture of in a second, which is broken down into 8 segments. So the first segment is your strategy and direction. So there's a lot of videos on strategy and development, and then you have a board meeting to define the strategy of this new company you've inherited or been given, and as a team you then take that business forward. Then this next step is the organizational culture. So again, a lot of discussions and videos, etc., online to talk about that topic. And again, discussions as a board on what are we going to have, what is the culture of our team, our board, what is the culture of our organization that we're going to take forward. 5th section is the Chief Executive Performance Enhancement. So it's about leadership development or effective leadership. So we go through an example of an executive performance process, for example, along with other materials. Then as you go around, you've got stakeholder engagement. So we said that's a key part of what you need to be talking about as a board. Then shareholder expectations. As we've said, it's really important to make sure you understand what are the shareholders' expectations around returns, about growth of the company, about things that they don't think are appropriate in terms of services, etc. And then to risk appetite. So this is typically where governance sits in most people's minds, is understanding the risk and compliance component. So there's a lot of material there on how to build risk matrices, what is the theory behind it, how do you practically do it. Then you come round to the finance side. So how do you set a budget? Why is it important? What's it used for? What do management reports look like in terms of financials? How do you present them? What sort of formats should you use for an income statement and balance sheet, etc., etc., etc. And then the last of the main components is where we do a board evaluation. You go through an evaluation process of the board you've just served on for 7 board meetings. And then we've added an 11th session where it's an opportunity for everybody to share their experiences and their learnings and understand how one company performs better than the other company. And there is a prize for the winning company based on the metrics that they've chosen. So we try and gamify this as much as possible, trying to make it as competitive as possible. And believe me, these teams get very competitive. So every seat is precious. And what we're trying to do is, as an organization, is understand that it's not a guarantee. So as I said, we've got education, we've got a point, and we've got the guide, but we can't guarantee that just because you've done the education, or even just because you're on our database as looking for appointments, that you will get something. It's just like any other database of job opportunities. This is like starting a new career. You need to have a certain level of skill and experience to get your foot in the door, but a large part of it is networking, how much effort you put into looking on different platforms, scouring the market for possible director opportunities. What we can do is make you ready for that opportunity, get you ready to sit in front of someone in an interview and be able to communicate your skill and experience effectively. So what is the outcome of this? So the idea is it reinforces and augments knowledge and understanding of directors' duties. We've talked a lot about that already today. Develop an understanding of an effective and integrated high performance board. So we've been through the 8 areas of the methodology by the time you've come to the end of the course. You've implemented, you've been through example board papers, you've followed pieces of the methodology. So you have now a much clearer understanding about how this works, and hopefully implied it in your own businesses or the businesses you work with along the way. And you were able to say you've experienced high performance boardroom engagement. You've been through the simulation process 8 times. You've had 8 board meetings. That's more than a lot of companies have in 2 years. So it's absolutely valid learning and absolutely valid experience to be able to say, oh, this is what I learned from that situation, and this is how we sorted out some differences of opinion that we had as a board, etc., etc. And ensure you have a working knowledge of the essential tools. So as I said, we've been through and given you templates, examples of this is how to structure an agenda. We've given you examples of minutes of the meetings. We've given you examples of board papers and board packs so that you can see how they're structured and how they're put together. We've followed a board calendar throughout the year. We've been through and experienced and repeated the meeting protocol. How do you run a meeting in a particular way? Demonstrate the practical experience and apply the methodology. So we've talked a little bit about that already. Identify areas of personal directorship strengths and opportunities. So I know from when I did the program a couple of years ago, in our little team, there were several people that said, I don't want to be a chairman. I've experienced it for 2 of the meetings in our group, and that's something I don't want to do. And others like myself have said, well, actually, that's something I really want to take forward. I really feel a lot more confident I can add value in that space. There may be others who say, look, I would rather be in the management side. I don't really want to be in the directorship side, at the independent director side. And someone else might decide to go on a whole new career and build a portfolio of consulting and non-executive director positions and all the rest of it because they're so excited about taking that journey. So it's a great opportunity to understand what your strengths are as a director and what the potential opportunities are to take it further. So you receive a certificate of attendance if you attend more than 9 or more of the 11 modules, and you receive a internationally recognized certificate of competence. So what we mean by internationally recognized, that there are many organizations and companies around the world that see our certificate as meaningful. So the Institute of Directors around the world will recognize that as having value. The Young Presidents Organization do a lot of our work. We've done various courses and training with them. It's very well recognized within that organization as being valuable, and the same with the Entrepreneurs Organization. And we've been working with several universities as well. What we don't have right now and what we're working on is getting formal endorsements from various organizations just to make it a little bit more formal. So if you have no time for this, you definitely have no time for the boardroom. So that's why I mentioned it's designed to make it as real as possible. So that if you survive, if you manage to finish the course and do it effectively, then it's a really good foundation, a really good understanding of what the work is involved when you go out into doing the non-executive director roles in the real world. 11 months in total, maximum 20 cohort, 3 or 4 boards, and 8 simulated board meetings. So each session in the calendar is 4 hours per month, either a morning or an afternoon cohort to accommodate for different time zones. 3 to 4 hours per week preparation seems to be a good measure. Try to do it consistently, don't leave it all to the end. So if you're doing something each week, then you'll be okay, and get the first 2 weeks to do the online materials, the videos, the reading, etc. Because as you get into the program, the second 2 weeks are likely to be preparation for the board meeting and having the session. So it's important that you work through your calendar and make sure you've put the blocks of time aside so that you can listen to and watch the videos, you can read the readings you need to read, and then you can prepare for the board meetings effectively, go through the board papers so you can contribute in the board meeting, just like you should be doing in the real world. And what's been really fascinating is there was, in our minds, going to be lots of pushback when we moved from running this program in various regional spaces. So we had a cohort in Cape Town, a cohort in Joburg, a cohort in Namibia, in Nairobi, a cohort in Accra. Moving online has given so many more opportunities to network, because each cohort is now a blend of people from Kenya, with Nigeria, with Ethiopia, with South Africa, with Namibia, where else it might be on this African continent, even from some of the Arab states. We've had people from the UK. So you now have an opportunity to network with 15, 20 people that are all over this region, have got all kinds of experience in different contexts, different industries, different legal environments. So it actually makes for a much richer sharing of experience and learning from each other. As I said, you get the certificates for attendance companies. So we invite you to join the program so that you can challenge your thinking, improve your prospects, and begin your journey as a high-performing director. And that really applies from pretty much wherever you've started from. It is a journey to reaching what we'd call being a high-performance director. So Buffett says, the best investment is in yourself. So numbers, please get back to your, I'm not sure what happened to the slide, it's gone all skew. Please get back to the person who gave you the link. If you don't have a particular person who gave you the link, then I'll give my contact details at the end, and by all means send me an email and I'll forward that to whoever needs to see it, whichever region you come from. So we have an office in Kenya, Nairobi, and we have an office in Accra, and we have various people in our team spread over the country, but predominantly in Johannesburg and Cape Town. So yes, US dollars 4497 plus VAT, all monthly payments. So next cohort's in September. The details are on the website. It's the 17th of September, I think. Let's just check. Where are we? 17th of September. Yeah, so the next group starts on 17th of September, and we'll be one session each month for 11 months. If you, I'm going to change this to the end of the week, since this is quite an early week group, but if you complete your application before the end of this week, then we'll be offering, just for today's offer a ticket to either one of our one-day workshops. So the Governing Family Business will be on the 29th of September, and the next one of the Directing Entrepreneurial Ventures will be in October. As I said, details on the website. And the idea being that it's really important to bring your team on this journey. So if you've decided to go ahead and get going with the Applied Directorship program, it's really useful to bring your business partner or even your life partner onto a one-day workshop, so they're up to speed with what you're thinking. They're up to speed with the concepts that you're dealing with and working with. So you don't grow apart, or it doesn't start to build the same kind of conflicts as it might in other cases. So yes, our opportunity for you is, if you sign before the end of the week, then we'll give you a free ticket for one of the next workshops for your business partner or life partner. To register, please go to this link, bit.ly/ADP online. It has to be all capitals, so bit.ly works on case sensitive. So bit.ly/ADP online. Click on that link. It'll take you to an application form. Once we've received the application, then we'll review it, make sure that you've got sufficient experience to fit in with the group, because we want to make sure that we don't have members that are too junior, because the idea is to share experience. We want to make sure that everybody's on a similar level so that we can all share our experiences and learn from each other. And as I said, the opportunity is for a debit order monthly basis, or you can pay upfront. Any questions? So let's come to questions. I'll just put my contact details up, so just make a note if you need to send to me, because there wasn't anybody else that you have been in contact with directly. You picked us up on the website or from another organization. Let's just look on questions. Owen, we did a so this is Olufulaki, can the secretary to the board double as an employee of the business, or should he be independent of the business? So if you mean the company secretary, then they can be an employee, absolutely. We would recommend that you have someone who's independent if possible, mainly for the minutes process, because it makes it much more effective if you've got someone who's not in the organization doing that, because they're, as we talked about with an independent director, there's less likelihood of conflict, there's less likelihood of someone trying to influence you because they're your boss, or you've worked with them for a long time, and minutes can start to become a bit of a political hot potato sometimes. So yeah, it's a good idea to have an independent company secretary. I know in Ghana that it's the law, you have to have one. In other regions, it's not something you have to do, but it's strongly advisable that you have someone who's skilled in that space working with the organization. And that's something that obviously we can do with our guide division. So by all means, pop us a line if you're interested in taking that further. Mine is a small business, and the challenge is directors easily get too involved in the operations to the point where they lose track. It's a very difficult thing to handle because of the three hats. So what I recommend is, as early as possible in an organization, start to become more aware of, okay, make a decision. First thing, make a decision. Are we going to be a craft where directors are not really a big issue, because you are the craftsman. So you may as well set yourself up as a sole proprietor kind of structure. It's all about the individuals that are going to take the business forward based on their skill. No, we definitely want to be an enterprise. So let's start thinking about, okay, let's have a shareholders meeting. Where can we meet to have a shareholders meeting once a year? Let's go to a particular coffee shop or sit in a particular room in our office, depending on your lockdown conditions. And we have a shareholders meeting, and that's where we have shareholders meetings. And we all agree before we walk in the room, this is discussion about what we want as shareholders. Then you start to put in the calendar when you're going to have a board meeting. And you need to be really clear, and everybody needs to be really clear, these are our responsibilities as directors. And the critical piece is being able to hold each other accountable. So, whoa, that's way too operational. Let's get back to the strategic discussion. Because that's what happens. The conversation drops to the lowest common denominator, which tends to be operations. So board meetings in smaller organizations typically are very operational. They're more like executive committee meetings, really. If you can hold each other accountable and with an understanding, say, well, guys, we're off topic. That's way too operational. Let's talk about that at our meeting next week or tomorrow or whenever it is in the calendar. We need to focus on the strategic side and have an agenda that talks to that strategic side, again, so that it's really clear that you've gone off topic. If you can bring some kind of independent director, independent chairman ideally, into the meeting, then it'll help enormously, because their sole purpose is to be a director. So if you start talking about operations, I'm just lost. I can't contribute because I don't know the detail, and actually we shouldn't be talking about it anyway. So it makes it much easier to hold the group accountable to talking about strategy and having a director conversation rather than being sucked into operational conversation. 11 hours of 4 hours, so 11 modules of 4 hours per module. Yes, so the formal facilitated sessions are 4 hours per month, and those are the dates that are in the calendar. The rest, the 3 or 4 hours a week, is in your own time, whenever you can fit it in, going through the videos on the online training portal or education portal, whether it's whilst you're jogging, if you're driving somewhere, all of those kind of opportunities where you've got dead time that you can listen to something is a great way of absorbing the videos. And then just get into a routine of read one of the chapters every couple of days in the evenings or during the mornings or whenever fits into your routine, so that you get the work done in a consistent way. But the only fixed time commitment is the 4 hours once a month that's in that board calendar, in the listing. And one more, That's it. Okay, Anonymous, thank you so much. Thank you. Anything else? Which universities have we tied up with in Kenya? We are in the process of trying to formalize that right now, and I must admit I need to speak to our Kenyan representative to find out where she's got to with that. Ahmed, has your question been answered? Let's just go back. So that's the cost. 4497 is the full rate. I know individual regions may have other special offers going on at the moment. So I said, speak to the individual region. And if you don't know who they are, then by all means, contact me and I will forward you to the right person. But the standard rate is 4497 plus VAT, or monthly rate. And I think that's everyone. Any others? Just stick it in the chat or the questions. Last chance. Cool. So thank you everybody for your time and for your attention. And I look forward to seeing as many of you as possible on the Applied Directorship program, because this is the sales part after all. But if nothing else, I hope you learned something. And then one last poll. Let's just say it's the right one. Yes. Just one last poll. If there's anything you would like in terms of follow-up, if you'd like us to provide any more information on anything in particular we've talked about today, then please just tick the relevant box in the poll that I've just posted, and we'll get back to you. So director training options. So this is one of them. Obviously, we have others. How to improve the performance of my board. So we would then look at maybe doing an evaluation of your board or an assessment of the whole governance process in your organization. Board evaluations is very specifically evaluating the board. Good governance practices could just be a telephone call, could be a whole consult. It really depends on the situation. And contribution compass profiler. Yeah, you get a contribution compass profiler with the Applied Directorship program. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. But very worthwhile to do your whole team to understand where they fit, how they work together, where the conflicts might be. It's proved to be a really powerful tool in terms of understanding your team dynamics and how everybody works together, and really understanding what your strengths and weaknesses are. So there are many tools like Strength Finder. Absolutely do Strength Finder as well. This is very much about how the team fits together, and we've built it in such a way that you can see quite quickly visually where the gaps might be, and they then link to our governance compass, to our management compass, and again, so that the whole suite of tools fit together to give you a really good insight of how to perform better as a management team and as a board. Was another question? Oh yes, so it's on chat. So if those of you who are in Kenya, Farah Ismail, who's head of our Kenyan team, has posted her email address. So just please make a note of that and she'll be happy to help. Any other feedback on the webinars? Any other questions? Last chance. So thank you again. Thank you for your time, and I really wish you all the best and a great evening. Thank you and goodbye.